It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the final two papers, actually, of this symposium, which broadens the remit a little bit to look a bit beyond Thelwall to some of the other exciting and interesting characters, one or two we've already encountered. And I say, indeed, a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, James Wood. James Wood is the Associate Professor of 18th Century Literature in the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing. James is also the research leader of the 18th and 19th century research group in the school and has done so much actually to take forward our research over the last few years. So I'm very grateful for his help and input into organising this conference or symposium. James is the author of Anecdotes of Enlightenment, Human Nature from Locke to Wordsworth, of the University of Virginia Press, 2021, which actually has some discussion of the very famous anecdote about John Thelwall that S.T. Coleridge recounts. And he's also the co-author with Emma Vyrubalova of the literary papers of the Reverend Jermyn Pratt, published in 2022 by the Norfolk Record Society, a very substantial scholarly edition of the unpublished writings of one of Norwich's literary figures, unrecognised perhaps literary or under-researched literary figures. That James is going to talk about Jermyn Pratt. In his talk, Jermyn Pratt, David Service, and Poetic Electioneering. Thank
you. And thanks so much, Peter. That's great. Okay, so I guess our talks are going to sort of approach the main topic of today from, I guess, oblique angles. And I'm going to start from a very oblique angle and talk about a poem that is not explicitly about politics, but about a pig. And the relevance of this will become clear, don't worry. And it's also a poem that is extremely filthy in all senses of the word. I think it would make a good candidate for the outrageous archive display, which, maybe I could get this one in. I think it certainly deserves a place in that exhibition. So, stop your ears or, just be aware that this is a very dirty, offensive, rude poem. It comes from a letter, actually, that was written by Jermyn Pratt, who, as Peter said, I co-edited with Emma Vyrubalova. And it is actually the first text of Pratt's that we found in the Norfolk Record Office. And you can see this letter out in the display room. So the poem is included in a letter to Colonel Wyndham, who with Lord Thompson was instrumental in creating the Norfolk militia. And Jermyn Pratt was a chaplain in the West Norfolk militia, in which his brother was also involved. So soon after making a kind of a march through down to London and around the country and then back up to Norfolk, Pratt writes to Wyndham, "I have now the blessedness of being in my own great chair by my own still fire," after this excursion. I can now look down upon my knuckle of veal with wonderful composure, where a sly strip of bacon peeps from behind a colony of cabbage with smoking alacrity. Granelia, a Hampshire beauty, waits upon Colonel Wyndham. If you find her too indelicate and dirty in expression, consider her as she is, a sow, and how difficult it is to pervert or stop the powerful operations of nature. I must think most of our writers of pastoral extremely faulty for giving the sentiments of a Newton to the carrier of a pitchfork. Their shepherds and shepherdesses, for no one else is permitted to love, put forth such exaggerated compliments, irregular wishes, and impracticable undertakings that they are frequently as absurd even to the renowned Orontes. I sent Granelia some time since to Soame Jennings, Esquire, and he was pleased to like it. If you find a few lines that are natural or comical and should make you smile, it will answer every intention of sending it and give real pleasure to him who begs leave to subscribe himself the most obedient and obliged humble servant, Jermyn Pratt. February the 22nd, 1760. And I'm not going to give you the whole poem, don't worry, but sort of the beginning, a bit from the middle and the end. So it's a travesty of pastoral poetry, a kind of travesty of the tradition of the pastoral invitation poem, I guess, that Christopher Marlowe contributed a famous example of in Come Live With Me and Be My Love. So here it is. Beneath an ample sty's refreshing shade, and doleful dumps a gentle sow inlaid, when heaving from her breast a rueful groan, she scrubbed her ass and thus was heard to moan, "Oh, woeful day, ah, day of woe," she cried, "when these pails my Grunion's chap I spied. His tinkling eyeball set my heart on fire, my wriggling tail betrayed a fierce desire. To the cleft door my tingling tail I turned, he licked beneath and with vexation churned, 1,000 kinder things enraptured said, and cursed the day that ever styes were made. Return, my Grunion, come, my lovely swine, my milk, my acorns, all I have is thine. 2 dainty turds each morning our ploughman shite, and thou, my love, shall have the biggest bite. When the autumnal heat we range the grove, I'll bring the juiciest crabs to cool my love. And when the winter snows upon our shed, I'll bring the clean horse muck for my Grunion's bed. And the conclusion, she wailed, she tearful to herself alone, the hollow tubs re-echoing every groan. When Cicely from the dairy screams aloud, whose well-known voice collects the grunting crowd, hogs, boars, pigs, pygmies with discordant din, rush to her pail and dash through thick and thin. She starts, she cocks the remnants of her ears. Her Grunion's voice she hears, or thinks she hears, and now his honest front appears in view. Her heart fluttered as he nearer drew. His short snub snout he thrust beneath the door, and with one heave he swings it on the floor, neglects his supper to remove her pain, and bottle screwed her till she squealed again. So lovely. Yeah, so I guess in the age of Lawrence Sterne, it's not surprising that clergymen sort of indulge in this this kind of thing. They like their rudeness, and so here's Colonel. Here's actually Thomas de Grey, who was actually Colonel Wyndham's son-in-law, and he was also involved in the militia after his father-in-law, William Wyndham. The father of the more, I guess, famous politician, William Wyndham Jr., had passed away. And at this point, Jermyn Pratt is actually writing against Thomas de Grey and as one of the 2 candidates who are associated with the administration. And he's writing for the opposition. He's writing for the candidates who are identified with, I guess, the cry of Wilkes and liberty. They are criticizing the administration for the practice of passing general warrants. So this is the ostensible election issue that the contested election of 1768 is fought, on which de Grey is on the opposite side. And I gave you the pig poem because the pig poem that Pratt wrote about 8 years before becomes a template for this political poem that's directed against Thomas de Grey, and which seeks to besmirch him by associating him with a lower class woman, a scullery maid. That there's an aspersion of a sexual relationship between these two. And I guess just as Grunelia is to Grunion, Cinderetta is to Thomas de Grey in this poem. Down she dropped her brush, Cinderetta, the dishcloth thrown aside, and lost was all the kitchen's silver pride. Scarce would the deep, majestic bellows blow, the labouring jack would hardly go. Dull was the brass, unwashed her earthenware, and Tabby sat neglected in her chair. Love wrought the change, 'twas love that had betrayed when thus in doleful dumps, okay, call back to Cinderella, no, to Granella, right? When thus in doleful dumps bewailed the maid, go, gentle girls, and hear my sighs away. Ah, why so long does her low thrumbo stay? And this was the name given to de Grey in the election literature. Why formed deigned nature's woman's love so strong? Or why art thou so tempting and so long? Resounds my tubs, my hollow tubs resound. Ah me, that love should give so deep a wound. Why in that house, the House of Commons, shouldst thou so strive to shine? Is it more clean or better kept than mine? Alas, I'm told, but they are lies, I ween. That dirty house no mortal yet could clean. Rub as they will and polish as they can, pensions and bribes will iron mold the man. And this poem ends with similarly with Cinderella, calling out to her love. Go, gentle gales, and bear my sighs away. Why so long does her low thrumble stay? Thus wailed she, tearful to herself alone. The hollow tubs re-echoing every groan. When lo, her much-loved hero stood to view, and her heart fluttered as he nearer drew. She sought the garret for her Sunday's pride, pinned on her nimbs and brushed the fleas aside. The busy sylphs attends the dressing fair, so she gets associated with Belinda in Alexander Pope's The Rake of the Lock. This clears the scurf, and this pork lards her hair. This with its breath reduced her tear-swollen eye, another fans the pouting nostrils dry. Down came the damsel with superior grace, with all the stew pan's radiance in her face. So dredged, so finished, and so soft her look, now trips a goddess, and now smiles a cook. Flies to her hero with resistless charms, and clasps the long, cold C-EL, but everyone knows it's de Grey, Colonel, in her arms. So I wanted to bring this up because it's, I think these are both poems about the relationship between elite culture and I guess the lower orders, popular culture. I mean, in both poems, the lower orders are associated with dirt and filthiness, but this also becomes a dirt and filthiness that is used to besmirch, so the genteel Colonel Thomas de Grey, to literally besmirch his reputation. But I think that it's too simple to say that Jermyn Pratt is occupying this kind of sphere of elite culture that has nothing to do, that has no sort of intersection with the crowd, with sort of popular forces, because we are very, Emma Verbelova and I are quite confident that the long poem, The Coal Heavers, is also by Jermyn Pratt, and we were able to find the actual case that this long mock epic poem, or longish mock epic poem refers to, which is actually, I guess, one of the first labour strikes. It's a labour strike by the coal heavers that follows many others. There's a very well-known one in London in 1768, in which the same appeal to Wilkes is made by the striking coal heavers as it was by sort of more genteel writers of political verse like Pratt. So this poem kind of dramatizes this actual case in which there was an episode of fisticuffs, it appears, on the docks of King's Lynn during a strike by coal heavers in order to increase their pay. And Pratt turns this into a mock epic vision full of references to, for example, the Aeneid. So stout Entellus is one of the fighters in the Aeneid during the book that covers the games that the Trojans play on routes to Lavinian shores. So in this poem, Pratt kind of expands this sort of incident of fisticuffs on the docks to a kind of mock epic battle in which dandies and dignitaries are involved in this sort of brawl with coal heavers. So here's part, and you can see this in the selection of documents. First stout Entulus levelled with the ground, the cooper's heir in calfskin waistcoat bound. The rich gilt edging glittered to the view, and from his low nose gushed out the eau de lou. Yeah, so I think we think it's an intellectual pun. So eau de lou, water of red, I guess R-E-A-D. But when you say it in English, it's water of red blood. Yeah, right. I think yeah. So silly pun anyway. 4 scented clerks, sweet youths with braided hair, fell by his hands and all perfumed the air. The mighty Milo with incessant blows drove at the bridge of aldermanic nose. Him twice 6 brethren of the common weal seized as he fell and dragged him by the heel. Forth from his mouth gushed out the mingled stream, the tail of lobster and the evening cream. Their prostrate chief the gathering hosts around, and his disdainful wig laid him by the ground. So I think, you know, this sort of goes through Pratt's writings, and that they're quite extensive. So the edition of the collected writings come out to sort of 400 pages. But I think Pratt is a writer very much interested in these kind of collisions of the high and the low, sort of the genteel and the street. And this kind of, I think, is a nice way of thinking about the crowd, and I guess turning our attention from Thelwall to the crowd that are represented in the famous Gilray print, which is not him declaiming in Great Yarmouth. This is actually in Islington, and he's giving a lecture sponsored by the London Corresponding Society. But part of the cultural anxieties that the print speaks to is to the threat that this plebeian crowd poses. You know, that he's stirring up this crowd, making them demand things that they shouldn't have, get ideas above their station. And these anxieties are, I think, sort of very much connected to his lecture on classical history, which becomes kind of a way of talking about politics in the present that he gave in Great Yarmouth. And it's interesting in his the pamphlet that he wrote in the aftermath of the attack at Yarmouth. He makes reference to the character of the crowd and says that there were 200 men and women in the crowd, quote, mostly very genteel. Yeah, mostly very genteel. So he's very concerned to, I guess, elevate the class character of the crowd that he is talking to. But in part, I think that's kind of a self-defense against sort of accusations precisely made by the Gilray prince of him talking to a plebeian audience. Okay, and so I thought the question that I'd kind of like to think about in the remainder of the talk is the connection between Jermyn Pratt, who I know most about, and David Service, who's writing from the other side of Norfolk in Great Yarmouth. And, you know, very much from the other side of the social order to Jermyn Pratt. David Service was one of the many shoemaker poets, one of the many labouring class poets who wrote in the long 18th century. Born in Scotland, as I said, he gives a nice potted biography in this lovely book that seems to have been put together by his son, Robert Thompson Service, in order to, I guess, memorize his father's. And so we have a silhouette. Unfortunately, that is not a silhouette of David Service, but it is a silhouette of his son. And it includes what would appear to be an actual advertisement for David Service's services as a shoemaker. Boots and shoes cheaply here mended, neatly as if for the great Squire Jarvan, strongly as well as it is intended, when they are done by David Service for ready money. And he gives a brief autobiographical sketch, which I think is good for kind of locating him. David Service, the son of Robert Service and Catherine McFarlane, was born at Little Carmichael in Cadras, Dunbartonshire, about the 15th of June, 1775, was bound as an apprentice to his uncle James Service, shoemaker, in Greenock, July 23rd, 1789, for a year and a half, got his indenture January 23rd, 1794, opened a door for leaving Scotland February 2nd, 1796, finally left Edinburgh April 1st, 1796, arrived in London May the 2nd, 1796, left London August the 2nd, 1797, arrived in Yarmouth, Norfolk, August 31st, 1797, married at Yarmouth, December 3rd, 1797 to Mary Ward from Bungay, visited London 1799, arrived at Bungay in the summer, left Bungay October 11th, 1800, and went to Harston, left Harston January the 1st, 1801, went to London, returned to Yarmouth in the summer, April 21st, and published The Caledonian Herd Boy. And I think this is interesting that he arrives in London and in 1796 and into Great Yarmouth 1797, which of course is right after the famous lecture that we've been hearing so much about today by John Thelwall. And there is a connection between this event and actually the Poetic Electioneering that David Service was involved in, because that lecture that Thelwall gave at Great Yarmouth was given at the invitation of the so-called Presbyterian Democrats. So they were sort of a collection of dissenters, of whom there were many in Norfolk, as we have heard. And they were leaders in the opposition to what was called the corporation interest. So the Tory candidates sponsored by Lord Thompson sort of identified with the Great Yarmouth Corporation and succeeded in some elections and actually getting their preferred candidate elected, against the power of the corporation and the entrenched interests. Fielding candidates who themselves were, helping, sort of field and gather support for candidates who were much less radical than they were, to be sure. But this points to, I think, a way that I guess a sort of a plebeian energy, very much characterizes the Great Yarmouth electoral culture, symbolized very well by David Service himself, who is, rising from a, low social position, but, very much involved in the same poetic tactics as Jermyn Pratt. So there is a nice poem that's in that sort of lovely kind of commonplace book that was prepared by his son, in which David Service gives a kind of vignette of his life at home. Matilda, Bob, the son who put the book together, wife, little John, compare my court around my throne, where with my book and pipe I sing, from day to day blessed as a king. My throne is of fir tree made, and making mending shoes my trade. But little money can we boast, yet what we get is ever lost. Bob runs and brings our Pope a loaf with speed, as with any other thing we need. Matilda reads, my wife, the news, and Jenny capers through the house. We rise, we eat, we drink our tea, and who so happy, sirs, as we? I don't have time to give you the short sort of poetic account of the experience of being in jail in at debtor's jail, but Service has a very long poem, sort of relating those that experience and those straitened circumstances, as well as many portraits of people from the lower classes in Great Yarmouth. And he's also, and I think that I could probably truncate this, but I think one interesting thing is that he writes to a now much more famous shoemaker poet, Robert Bloomfield, in which he sort of discusses the experience of getting harsh reviews And this poem, I think, is kind of a bid for social connection and perhaps you know, a kind of a form of patronage. He writes, Mr. Bloomfield, sir, since I left London, I have often thought of you and Mr. Holloway, and notwithstanding the difference of your situation and mine, I have earnestly converted a fresh supply of that pleasure I enjoyed in your company a few times I called upon you in London. I need not inform you of my propensity to rhyming. That you may gather from the wild harp's murmurs. Here you have many instances of rhyme. With reason, you have probably seen what some of your lamas in censure has had to say about them. The lamas is a sort of poetic speak for critics. Not that I would judge a work good or bad on their testimony. The contrary has been found, but this you may think borders on commending my own productions, which is far from my intention. So he's a poet who writes, I guess, serious works of poetry, the Caledonian Herd Boy, in which he refers to himself as Sigma, just like you know, sort of many poets of this period will call themselves by the third person, like for example, Anne Yearsley, another labouring class poet, so it refers to herself as Letitia. So he's writing serious works of poetry, but he's also heavily involved in the culture of writing political squibs in Great Yarmouth as well. And he writes one poem that I'm particularly interested in called Lacon, a parody. It's actually a parody of, I guess, what we could call like a long 18th century meme. And that is the speech given by Norval in John Holmes' Douglas, a Tragedy, published in 1757. And I might just quickly give you this. I'm sorry, I forgot to include the slides, so you just have to kind of like imagine it. But here's the source of the parody. It's spoken by the character Norval, who has been raised by old Norval, an old shepherd. But Norval's origins are actually highborn. He is the son of Lady Radolph and the posthumous son of Lord Douglas. And I guess Norval's slash Douglas's story is the same as Perditia's and A Winter's Tale, or Oedipus's and Oedipus at Colonus. He is one of those highborn babies abandoned in the countryside. And of course, if you're highborn and abandoned in the countryside, you're not going to die. You're going to be discovered by a shepherd or shepherdess, and you're going to be raised and then meet your actual parents later. It's a very common phenomenon. So anyway, this is Norval when he is meeting Lord Radolph and saying why he has come to the battlefield. My name is Norval. On the Grampian hills, my father feeds his flocks, a frugal swain, whose constant cares were to increase his store and keep his only son, myself, at home. For I had heard of battles, and I longed to follow the field some warlike lord, and heaven soon granted what my sire denied. The moon, which rose last night round as my shield, had not filled her horns when, by her light, a band of fierce barbarians from the hills rushed like a torrent down upon the vale, sweeping our flocks and herds. The shepherds fled for safety and for succor. I alone, with bended bow and quiver full of arrows, hovered about the enemy and marked the road he took, then hasted to my friends, whom, with a troop of 50 chosen men, I met advancing. The pursuit I led till we overtook the spoil encumbered foe. We fought and conquered, ere a sword was drawn. An arrow from my bow had pierced their chief, who wore that day the arms which now I wear. Returning home in triumph, I disdained the shepherd's slothful life, and having heard that our good king had summoned his bold peers to lead their warriors to the Carron's side, I left my father's house and took with me a chosen servant to conduct my steps. Yon trembling coward who forsook his master, journeying with this intent, I passed these towers, and heaven directed came this day to do the happy deed that gilds my humble name. Okay, so I think this is interesting that Service chooses to parody a poem set in a play set in Scotland, and a speech given by a herds boy, just like he had been in Scotland before he came to Great Yarmouth to become a shoemaker. So I think there's a kind of a double movement here, a reference to his own origins, who are very well publicized, but almost a kind of an attempt to use those origins to bring down the opponent, Lacon, Edmund Knowles Lacon, who was one of the two candidates with William Loftus in 1818, who were favoured by the corporation. During the general election, in which the main issues were parliamentary reform, civil liberties, and also Catholic emancipation. And this was an election in which the favoured candidates for the corporation, the Tories or the Reds, were defeated by the Blues, for whom Service is writing. So here's the parody. My name is Lacon. On the Yarmouth Quay, my father keeps his bank, a brewer great, whose constant cares were to increase his store and keep his favourite, Knowles, myself, in place. For I had heard of pensions, and I longed to follow in the court some castlereagh, and heaven soon granted what my birth denied. This moon, which rose last night, thick as my head, had not yet filled her horns, when by her light a band of vessel freemen from the green rushed like a torrent in, disgraced the town, stunning our ears with noise. The Blues, surprised, with honour took to bed. I alone, with full remorse and bosom full of fears, hovered about the town and marked the votes they got and hasted to the hall, where with my vassals, corporation men, we argued. The language was refined. We overtook the blue, true conquering foe. We fought, were vanquished. Ere a vote was given, a saying from my dad had spoiled my cause, who spoke as foolish as I now can speak. When returning home in anger, I despised the freeman's votes, but having heard that the Prince Regent had desired his peers to make another parliament, I left my lodgings in Pall Mall and took with me a brother to assist my case, yon red time-serving ministerial Loftus. Journeying with this intent, I passed the bridge, and self-directed came this day to do the silly deed that blasts Lacon's name. No, so so here it's like the going to present himself in front of the Great Yarmouth electorate is the same as compared to Norval's volunteering himself to serve for King in battle. And I think one of the most interesting things here is that Service is not above or perhaps below belittling his opponent's Lacon's own social origins, sort of emphasizing the fact that Lacon is new money, the son of a brewer, of not the same social station as his opponents. And I think this kind of speaks to I guess the sort of the social complexity of this time in which a labouring class writer like David Service can be writing these squibs and making the same sort of patrician appeals as the Reverend Jermyn Pratt. And here, this is actually quite interesting, and I confess that I'm actually not quite sure whether this is a document created by David Service or perhaps some kind of put on created by his opponents, but it's actually ostensibly notice given to the worthy and independent freedom of Great Yarmouth, proposing David Service as a candidate for the election, but not interestingly for the Blues, the ones that he has said he has written for for years, but for the Reds. And this was actually because the father of Thomas William Anston had died, that Anston actually had to give up his seat at the House of Commons in order to take his father's place, and it was actually his younger brother who ended up presenting himself to the electorate and being elected unopposed. So that this is the context in which he appears to be proposing himself to the electorate. But I think this must be, if it was issued by David Service, it must be some kind of elaborate joke, because looking at the electoral records, David Service couldn't actually vote, it seems, in the Great Yarmouth election. He didn't meet the property requirements. But I think this is lovely. It's interesting. I do confess I'm not quite sure whether it's written against Service or written by Service as a kind of joke. But it does emphasize the way that these kind of poetic acts of poetic electioneering could summon up the possibility of someone like David Service running to become Member of Parliament for Great Yarmouth. And so I just like to just kind of sum up by I guess going back to that kind of juxtaposition of Jermyn Pratt and David Service writing from opposite ends of Norfolk, writing exactly 50 years apart, one writing in the 1768 election, one writing in the 1818 election, writing from opposite ends of the social ladder. But really, I'm struck by what they have in common. I mean, their shared interest in using broadly the tradition of the pastoral in order to sort of bring the high and the low together in a satirical and parodic way. And I think that together they speak to the pressure that the lower orders place on electoral politics, even at a time when, of course, there is not even universal male suffrage. The sort of entwinement of electoral politics with the lower orders.